referred to that as loss of information. Because in the technical definition of information, you've lost information when it's non-unitary. The phrase losing information is easier for a non-physicist to understand. What it really means is you collapse something to make a black hole, it evaporates, and the evolution from before black hole forms to after it evaporates is non-unitary. People have struggled, many of the best minds in physics have struggled ever since then to understand this, and because all the great majority of the empirical physicists in the world are convinced that quantum evolution must always be unitary. You can throw information away by accident or on purpose, but if you keep track of everything, you have truly unitary evolution. They have found that it's very difficult to see how, for black holes, you do have unitary evolution. This most recently has led to speculations about things called firewalls, which are just wild and seem crazy, and are indicative of how difficult this problem is. Stephen Hawking threw in the towel on this and decided that the evolution is unitary in 2003, I think it was. And he decided it was probably unitary, though he didn't ever give details in the calculation. I know him very well. He didn't really work them out. It appeared to him that a difficult calculation would make this seem true. That there's an alternative formulation of quantum mechanics called the sum over histories formulation, or path integral formulation, due to Richard Feynman. And in that, you evolve from your current state to a future state by summing over all possible histories that could have led you from this state to that state. And so what Stephen said was, among all the histories that could lead you from the implosion that's making a black hole to the end with thermal radiation all coming out, no more black hole, there are a few histories where the black hole never formed. And he argued that the information, or the preservation of unitarity, is arrived at through those histories and some over histories, through that small fraction of the histories where the black hole never forms. Nobody has ever given a quantitative analysis that shows that this really works. He had a PhD student who was working on it and dropped out. It's too hard to follow. My own view, which is a minority view, but by no means, there are a number of eminent physics theorists who share the view, but we're a great minority, is this, that in the Feynman sum over histories approach to quantum mechanics is much more general than the standard approach. And in that approach, it is possible to have non-unitary evolution. The thing that will give rise to it is closed timeline curves. And so we think it's moderately likely that when you do a sum over histories to evolve from one state to another, you have to include histories with closed timeline curves, so things can all evolve backward in time and move forward. And we know how to do quantum mechanics in the present closed timeline curves, and the evolution is clearly non-unitary in that case. The Feynman approach to quantum mechanics agrees with the usual approach if there are no closed timeline curves. In the present closed timeline curves, the two are different. The standard quantum mechanics can't deal with it. It just throws up its hands and says, if there are closed timeline curves, then quantum mechanics doesn't work. The Feynman approach says, I can do it just fine, and does it, and then lose unitarity. So it's my view that most likely, because this has been such a big problem for over 40 years, to try to resolve it, my colleagues have to go into such great contortions. It's my view that it's likely that the Feynman approach is the fundamental approach to quantum mechanics. and information is lost, that its unitarity is lost. The black holes form. Again, a long answer, but I think it's a very interesting question. I then would add, and I think this is very important, that I don't work on this. I think that these kinds of questions are the most deepest questions and the most interesting questions in theoretical physics. I've never worked on them because that's a field that is extremely crowded. By personality, I don't enjoy working in an area where it's really crowded with lots of really brilliant people. Most of them more brilliant than I am. If I don't make a discovery today, somebody else will make it tomorrow. It's just my personality. And so I have avoided fields like that. The reason I got into gravitational waves partly was that there were no other theorists who were working on it in a serious sort of way. So it's a choice. But, other questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And do you know something about the formation of the central supermassive black holes in galaxies?
Do I know something about them? A little bit. What's the question?
How did they form?
I don't think anybody knows. Yeah. I mean, there are various theories, and I don't keep up with the theoretical model. So we have a similar problem that I do know a bit more about the status of, and that is the black holes that we see colliding with LIGO. We've now seen about 20, I think, as of the day before yesterday. 20 black hole collisions. The heavier of these things are masses up to about 50 solar masses. And the question is, where do black holes that weigh 50 solar masses come from? And that are in binaries and colliding with other black holes that weigh something approaching 50 solar masses. The theory of stellar evolution says that, at least with the populations of stars that we have today, in the late stages of stellar evolution, you have stellar winds that blow off so much mass that by the time the star dies and collapses to form a black hole, it doesn't get above maybe 20 solar masses, 25 solar masses. And so it has been a question, where do these bigger black holes masses come from? That's not as, in some sense, not as grand a problem as the heavy ones at the center of the galaxy. But at least this is where I know something of it. There are two good, very plausible explanations. One is that these black holes formed long ago out of matter that had much lower, what we call metals, much lower heavy atoms that have build high opacity, that are crucial for making strong solar winds. You have to have high opacity to blow the gas off a star. So if the first population of stars, which had very little heavy elements, mostly just hydrogen and helium, collapsed to form black holes, they would form these heavy black holes. The second possibility that I find a little more attractive and a little more likely is in clusters of stars, such as globular clusters, you form smaller mass black holes, but through something called tidal friction. They sink to the center, find each other, collide, and merge. You have successive mergers that wind up making big black holes and black hole binaries. But that gives you a sense of the kinds of scenarios that astrophysicists invoke to explain puzzles like this. But the big black holes, I don't know the status of that.
I have two questions. First one is
Let me give you one question so that other people
all right. Go for one. I want to ask you about the future of gravitational waves in the sense of another part of the frequency spectrum of gravitational waves. In particular, for example, the project LISA and the pulsar timing arrays. Do you know how is the status of these two
So,
projects,
of
in
Lisa,
particular the
Lisa
PTA.
in particular,
Yeah, PTA in particular.
and PTA.
One to-
So LIGO and Virgo operate in the frequency band between about 10 hertz and in practice about 1,000 hertz. So you go on up, but the noise is getting pretty bad about 1,000 hertz. That's wavelengths of or periods of milliseconds, from 1 to 100 milliseconds. And so LISA is designed to operate with periods that range from something like 10 seconds or so up to periods of a few hours. This other technique called PTA is designed to work at periods between roughly a year and 30 years. 30 years being limited by the lifetime, the protected lifetime of a physicist, or by how long you've had the technology. LISA is 3 spacecraft in interplanetary space that track each other with laser beams in a triangular configuration. And PTA is one radio telescope or a number of radio telescopes. Just use a number to get better sensitivity. That are looking at a number of pulsars in the sky that are very stable in their pulsations. And when a gravitational wave goes over the Earth, it, in effect, though this isn't really what happens, but it's as though clocks on the Earth are speeding up and slowing down. So it will look like the pulsars, the time between pulses in a pulsar slows down and speeds up. And it happens to pulsars there, and there, and there, and there. And that's a little different. But what really happens is the gravitational waves produce something like a varying index of refraction. So when the wave comes into the presence of the gravitation, when the radio wave comes into the presence of the gravitational wave, it appears to speed up its speed and slow down. It's because of this effective change in refraction. But the bottom line is the same. The pulses speed up, slow down, speed up. But anyway, so 2 different techniques in 2 different frequency bands, differing from the standard technique we're now using. Pulsar timing arrays are at a sensitivity. Well, for pulsar timing arrays, the target source is very, very heavy black hole binaries, where the black holes weigh, say, 10 million to 10 billion solar masses. For LISA, it's smaller mass black holes between, let's say, 1,000 solar masses and 10 million solar masses. But LISA also has other sources that it's going after, such as the phase transition, the electrowave phase transition, gravitational waves from the Earth and the electromagnetic force, which I talked about in my earlier lecture. The status of them, LISA, well, both of these techniques were devised in the 1970s, and radio astronomers have been pushing since the 1970s to get better and better sensitivities for the PTA technique. And they have reached a sensitivity where it is quite plausible that they will begin seeing gravitational waves from these heavy black hole binaries. We don't know how many of the heavy black hole binaries there are, and so we have a rough idea, and they are in the range where it's quite plausible they would see something, but they haven't seen it yet. And they're continuing to improve sensitivity and dig deeper down into that range. They had a shot at seeing gravitational waves before we did with LIGO, but nature was more kind to us than nature was to LIGO. The LISA, again, was conceived also in the 1970s, and the idea was developed primarily in the United States by people at the University of Colorado, or National Bureau of Standards in Colorado, and then was formulated initially as a NASA project, and then Europeans joined in very quickly, and it became a joint U.S. NASA European Space Agency project. Then in the George W. Bush administration, the way I would put it is NASA management became incompetent. But they had huge cost overruns on the James Webb Space Telescope. They started slashing anything that had to do with astrophysics in order to keep that telescope moving forward and development on schedule. So they wiped out the NASA participation in LISA, among many other things. LISA then became, this is about 2012, 2010, 2012 was the election for Obama. Is that right? No, let me back up. It was earlier than that. It was in, well, anyway, in the early 2000s. And so the European Space Agency went forward with it, but as a pure European mission, they couldn't see how to get the money to do it as robustly as was planned jointly. And so they cut out one of the three arms, and they introduced things that introduced major single point failures. One thing would go wrong and the mission would fail. You just don't want to do that with a space mission. And they lost sensitivity by a significant amount. So it was not a very good mission. Since two things happened in 2015, LIGO's discovery of gravitational waves was one. The second was that the Europeans had a technology development mission called the LISA Pathfinder, which flew to test the most difficult of the technologies involved in LISA. And it did better than anyone had dreamed in terms of showing the technologies that were working. And so it became basically a goal in Europe, motivated by LIGO's success and motivated by reducing worries about the technology. But still in a configuration that is quite much less than optimal for the reasons I described. NASA is in the process of negotiating with ESA to rejoin, and with the goal then of turning this back into the more optimal original mission. But NASA now will join in as junior partner, and ESA is really in charge of the mission, which I think is perfectly fair under the circumstances. The U.S. is a very unreliable international partner because of our political system. NASA makes commitments and then has to pull out for political reasons that have to do with change of administration. Those of you who've seen the Trump era have some. So ESA, this will very likely go forward with NASA, with the U.S. as a junior partner, and in a robust configuration, really success-oriented. The current launch date has been for the last few years, I think, 2034, and the hope is that that can be pulled back to a 2030 launch date. I don't know the status of that. This is still in flux, and as far as I'm aware, the negotiations for bringing NASA back into it are still underway.